Okay, today's class is on evolution and what is it that causes evolution. So the name of the chapter is changing allele frequencies, because that is the basic that needs to change for any evolution to occur. So we talked about Hardy-Weinberg equilibrium in the last class, and you know that is a state of equilibrium which has assumptions, and if those assumptions are met, that means the allele frequencies and the genotype frequencies stay constant generation after generation. So whatever was there in generation 1, it would be the exact same thing in generation 2 and generation 3 and generation 4. So there were those 5 assumptions or 5 conditions that had to be met in order for a population to stay in Hardy-Weinberg equilibrium, which is unchanging allele frequencies. So what are those assumptions? We talked about it, and these are listed on this slide here. So these are the conditions that can or cannot change allele frequencies, okay, depending on what is happening. So we will try to understand these 5 conditions, and these are actually the factors that cause evolution, okay? So if these factors go in one way, then evolution does not occur and population stays in Hardy-Weinberg equilibrium. If they go the other way, then evolution occurs and population is not in Hardy-Weinberg equilibrium. In order for us to understand these 5 factors, look at the 5 fingers of your hands. So we are going to understand these 5 factors by drawing an analogy between the fingers of your hands and these factors. So the factors are, first one is genetic drift, also known as Sewell-Wright effect, which is based on the name of the scientist who wrote about it. Non-random mating, number 2nd. Number 3rd is mutation. Number 4th is migration, and number 5th is natural selection. So genetic drift, we are going to compare it to the pinky finger of our hand, the small one. What is genetic drift or Sewell-Wright effect? Genetic drift means random fluctuations in allele frequencies from generation to generation that happen purely by chance to gametes. Something happens, a freak accident occurs, and this causes a change in the allele frequencies of a population. Okay, let's say there was an island and a tsunami occurred. So it was something that it could be a natural disaster, it could be a man-made disaster, anything that happened by chance, and it killed a lot of people. That means when a lot of people get killed from a population, you're changing the allele frequency, right? So that is genetic drift. This is fluctuations in allele frequencies from one generation to the next that happened purely by chance. Now, why are we comparing it to the pinky finger, the small finger? Is because this kind of effect, the genetic drift, is very conspicuous when the population is small. If the population is large, the larger the population, the smaller the effect. The smaller the population, the greater the effect. For example, if that island had only 100 individuals living in there, that means the total size of the population was 100 people, and the tsunami killed 50 out of the 100. So 50% of the population is gone. We've lost 50% or whatever variety of genes and alleles they had. But imagine now this island has 1,000 individuals, and out of that 50 individuals died. There is less of an effect on this population, which is bigger than the effect that was on the small population. So remember, the smaller the population, the greater the genetic drift. Okay, so that is why pinky finger, the small finger of your hand. So events that create small populations enhance the effect of genetic drift. Migration, natural disaster, consequences of human behavior, any random change in the allele frequencies for whatever reason, but this has to be by chance. Okay, these occur at random and these were unpredictable. So that is genetic drift. And there are so many examples of genetic drift. First of all, after all of these 5 factors, we will understand these 5 factors with the help of diagrams like these. So this is the original population. If you see here, the original population is made up of so many types of genotypes: the red circles, the orange squares, the green diamonds, the blue triangles. Okay, and all of these were equal in proportion, 5 out of 20. So this is 25%. A genetic drift occurred, something unpredictable, random happened, and we lost some individuals. Okay, now out of these, only now this population is remaining. So now you see how the population distribution proportion of the genotypes has changed. Now this has become 20% instead of 25% of the population, right? So this is genetic drift. An example of genetic drift is called a founder effect. What is a founder effect? Founder effect occurs when a small group of individuals leaves their original abode to go and found, okay, new settlements, the pioneer population. And this, because a small proportion of this population, they just broke away from the original population, went to a new place and started a new habitat, created a new population there. That means the allele frequencies in this new population might be very different from what was there in the original population. For example, the community of Afrikaners of South Africa, they all come from a small group. Okay, their ancestors were Dutch, French, German. So these are German immigrants from these countries. And they went to South Africa and they were the founding population there. So they created a population there. Now what happens is, because of this very small population and a lot of inbreeding between these individuals, a lot of recessive disorders, they start expressing themselves. So this population shows 20 types of inherited disorders, okay? And these disorders may not be very common in the local population if you take all the general population, but because the founders who left the original population, they might have had these some of these diseases, and because of the inbreeding between these founding members, these diseases come to the forefront. Continuing with founder effect. Now, the founding population, again, they might end up having, a lot of them might end up having the mutation. For example, if you take the case of Bulgarian gypsies, there is higher incidence of a kind of disease, an inborn error of metabolism, which causes blindness or cataract. Or if you take Ashkenazi Jewish people, they also like to, it's a very small population. They came from another part and you settle down, and they show a BRCA breast cancer mutation. This BRCA one is responsible. It makes a woman susceptible to breast cancer. So this is very high in this community. So this is all because of genetic drift. Or the Amish people. The Amish people, they all descended from, they have the Swiss founders, and these people live very simple lives. They do not adopt any kind of technological progress. Now, again, this particular community likes to stick amongst themselves. They don't want to marry people outside of their community. So there's a lot of inbreeding. One of the founding members had a particular syndrome. This syndrome, which causes polydactyly, that means multiple fingers, short stature, okay, defects in the heart, cardiovascular problem. And now this disease has become extremely common in this Amish population. 1 in every 200 is homozygous for this syndrome, which is really rare. If you take the general population in US, this syndrome is a very, very rare syndrome. You don't see it because this is recessive. So in order for this recessive disorder to be expressed, you need the homozygous recessive condition. But this becomes more and more prevalent as inbreeding, in the community occurs. So you see here, this is a list of some of the founder populations where the number of founders is given, how many people started this population, and the number of generations and their population size today. So all of these fall under genetic drift, Sewall-Wright effect. Another example of genetic drift is a population bottleneck. Okay, these are very similar, and sometimes you see the definitions, they overlap. So population bottleneck occurs when a large population is drastically reduced in size, okay, for man-made or natural reason, whatever. So if you take this here, this is a cheetah population. So let's say originally the cheetah population had all of these alleles, okay, different types of genes were present. And because of, rampant hunting, poaching, habitat destruction, for whatever reason, so because of adverse conditions, cheetahs started dying, okay, or they were killed. So as more and more cheetahs were killed, the cheetah population declined. So the ones that survived probably ended up having only these alleles. So this is the bottleneck that happened. You see, from a huge allelic, gene pool, now we have only this much variety got lost. And then because of conservation efforts and sanctuaries and all these national parks. So these, whatever surviving population was there of the cheetahs, they were taken to these national parks and conservation areas, and then they were allowed to breed, and then they ended up creating a new population. But this new population has lost a lot of alleles which was present in the original cheetah population, because only these were the ancestors. The ancestors had only D, J, L, and M. So even if they are inbreeding, you know, and they are producing new individuals, the individuals have lost the variety of alleles which could have been there in the original population. So this was the bottleneck event. So you see cheetahs in South and East Africa, or the Ashkenazi Jews, you know, man-made reasons, and then non-random mating. So all of these lead to population bottlenecks and lead to change in allele frequencies. Because of whatever reason, we lose some alleles for natural or for man-made reasons, and then whatever is left, it ends up creating or recreating, repopulating. So, but we have changed the allele frequency. So that was all about the pinky finger, genetic drift, COL right effect. That was the small population, bigger effect, right? Then we move to the next finger on your hand, that is the ring finger. So when you think of the ring finger, it reminds you of the ring, marriage. So here, this finger we are using to talk about non-random mating. For a population to not evolve, that means for a population to be in Hardy-Weinberg equilibrium, what was the assumption? The assumption was that the population would randomly mate. There would be no selection. But this does not occur in nature, okay? Naturally, that is not possible. People do not, human beings, even animals, they do not just randomly mate, okay? For mating, people select their partners, and that selection could be based on so many reasons. So that is totally non-random mating. If you take the case of human beings would prefer to marry or to date someone based on certain things, you know, based on their preferences. Could be physical appearance, it could be a particular cultural, religious, you know, ethnic preferences. It could be IQ levels, it could be certain shared interests, hobbies. Like research has shown that red-haired individuals usually prefer other red-haired individuals. Yeah? And that is true, it has been shown by research. Or people with a certain level of IQ, you know, above certain IQ, they prefer. So in simple words, nerdy people prefer nerdy people, tall people look for tall people, okay? And this is statistics, you know, research has shown. So people are choosing their partners. It is not random mating going on. So people would marry people similar to themselves about 80–90% of the time. So at this level, we have already started evolution because this is non-random mating. So the ring finger should remind you of this factor of evolution, the non-random mating. So you see here, this is the, let's see, this is the original population, again with the same 25% of each type. But because of non-random mating, let's say this triangle, this one is made, you know, the blue triangle mates more often. So because this is mating more often, so this is going to increase in population. 40% of this has gone up. Examples, some examples of non-random mating. Historically, if you've heard about Genghis Khan was a very notorious Mongolian warrior who's from Asia. And in present times, it is said, research has shown that about 16 million males, okay, living between Afghanistan and China are believed to be related to him in some way or the other. It's because of the Y chromosome inheritance, it has been detected, okay? So, or if you look at a particular, in US, if you look to Arizona and you look at the Hopi Indians, albinism is a very common problem there. You know, albinism is genetically inherited, and it's because of non-random mating. Okay, so all of these are non-random mating cases. Now, continuing with non-random mating, in certain cultures, certain religions, consanguinity and endogamy are also very common. So people get married between, you know, very closely related closely related cousins, and also step-brothers, step-sisters sometimes can also get married in certain cultures. So that is, consanguinity means marriage between blood relatives. Endogamy means marriage within a community, but the spouses, they may be unaware that they are related to each other. Now what happens is genetically this is not preferred. Genetically this is not favored. Why? Because when you are marrying to somebody who might be related to you in some way, then there's a higher chance of a recessive disorder getting expressed, because the two people are related, so they might have the same recessive disorder. And if it's recessive single dose, it's not expressing itself, but when these two individuals get married, then their offspring can end up getting one dose from the mom and one dose from the dad, so two doses of the recessive disorder, and that will get expressed. Then moving on to the next finger, middle finger. So middle finger starts with an M, and this next factor of evolution is mutation, which also starts with an M, okay? Mutation is a raw material for evolution. For evolution to occur, mutation is a must. If there is no mutation, there is no evolution, okay? And these are major and continual sources of genetic variation. So this continual is very important because mutations are occurring continuously, but these are baby steps. It's not that a single mutation and we see a new species in the next generation. No, that does not happen. But these small mutations accumulate over time, microevolution. And then when a lot of these mutations have accumulated, that's when you see macroevolution. That's when you see a new species, okay? So genetic variability is also because of mutation. And we know different types of mutations. When mutations have become so common that they are present in more than 1% of the population, we simply call them polymorphism. And polymorphism also makes every human being different from another, right? So the SNP, or the single nucleotide polymorphism profile in one person is very different from the SNP profile in another person, and from the third person, and from the fourth person. So even though we are still the same species, but we are very different from each other. This is because of the mutations. So how mutations are altering, you see this was the original population. Let's say a mutation occurred and the blue triangle and the green diamond have become the yellow squares. So now look at how this population looks and see the proportion, how these have changed. So mutation is changing the population. Now mutations not necessarily will always be bad or good. Okay, it can be anything. And most mutations are actually neutral. They don't produce any effect on the trait, no phenotypic effect. Why? Because remember, from the genetic code, if only the last codon, the last base of the codon gets changed, it still produces the same amino acid. So that is neutral. Now for a mutation to have a drastic effect, there should be another factor of evolution acting along with mutations, such as the natural selection or the genetic drift. So mutation will produce a very fast effect if natural selection and genetic drift are acting in support of the mutation. So mutations can be adverse mutations, mutations can be beneficial mutations, mutations can be neutral mutations, okay? Now this term here, genetic load is the collection of recessive, deleterious, means bad alleles in a population, okay? Fourth one, fourth finger, we are going from pinky, we've done pinky, ring finger, middle finger. Now going to the pointer or the index finger. We use our index finger usually to point out things. Which way should I go, this way or that way? We use our pointers. So use that pointer to remember migration, moving in this direction or moving in that direction. Okay, it could be emigration, moving out. It could be immigration, moving in. So when individuals emigrate or immigrate, they move in or move out of a population, they are moving genes with them. Okay, if there was a small village in a very remote area comprising of 100 people, and then 10 individuals decided to move away from that. So out of that 10, out of that 100, 10 people have gone, 90 are remaining there. So there's a loss of alleles, emigration of alleles or emigration of genes from that population. And those 10 individuals, if they went and they joined the neighboring village, let's say a neighboring tribe in the forest, and that tribe also had 100 people to start with. Now that tribe has gained those 10 individuals, they have gained a lot of genes and new alleles, okay? So the addition or removal of alleles will alter the genotypic frequencies as people move in or move out. So this is the original population. The red circle and the yellow squares are migrating, okay? Now you see the red circles came in, so the red circle proportion has gone up from 25%, it is now 32%, and the yellow one has also come in, so this proportion has also increased. Now we have changed the allele frequencies in this new population. So this can change, so that means the population is no longer in Hardy-Weinberg equilibrium. Now migration doesn't always cause a black or white effect, okay? So you see a gray between that black and white, that the different shades of gray. So that is a continuous gradient. We call it climb. Climb means where a process where allele frequencies change from one neighboring population to another, sort of in a gradient, okay? They change gradually. Now, sometimes climbs could be caused abruptly, very abruptly, suddenly something happened, okay? Or most of the times it is gradual. So climb boundaries could be caused by historical events, okay? A war happened in those ancient days. War happened and this entire village was burnt and murdered. That's a very abrupt change. Cultural differences, geographical barriers, earthquake happened, okay, and then prevented the people from two neighboring villages from mingling with each other, from interbreeding. Language differences, what was the pattern of migration? All of this can cause a continuous gradient or climb. And a historical example is when you see the occurrence, incidence of a particular disease, the GAL-K deficiency in Europe. This illustrates a climb. How? You start from Bulgaria, and there is this group, okay, the Roma gypsies here, and you see their incidence. 1 in 1600 would have this disorder. Then as we are moving away, as the population spread out, and the further you move away from this epicenter, you see that the incidence of the GAL-K deficiency goes down. Here in Austria, it is 1 in 153,000. You move further away, Germany, 1 in 157,000. They move further away to Switzerland, and it was 1 in 2,200, 1,000 individuals. So the incidence is gradually decreasing or going down as we are moving away from Bulgaria. So we're done with 4 fingers, and finally we reach the thumb. And we usually show our thumbs to show the thumbs up sign. Okay, something good happened or you're fine, you're okay, and you show the thumbs up. So the thumbs up is for natural selection. So natural selection means when nature selects in a population, okay, and nature would always select keeping in mind a bigger goal, a bigger picture. So is the differential survival and reproduction of individuals with a particular genotype, okay? When nature sees there are 5 or 6 different types of genotypes leading to different types of phenotypes, well, how does nature screen? Nature screens for fitness, okay, and reproductive success, because nature wants to keep, continuation of life, perpetuation of species. So nature would always select for this person is the most adapted to survive in this particular environmental condition, and that means this person will continue to reproduce and keep the species alive. Okay, that is nature's criteria. The person who's most adapted to survive, to live in this environmental condition, okay, who will be able to overcome the adverse conditions there, and that means species will continue. And that could mean it might be 2 types of selection, negative and positive. Something that the nature does not like, if the nature thinks that this is not very suitable to that, there would be negative selection against it, okay? So nature will not favor the survival of that particular trait, that particular individual, that particular population. Whereas some other trait that is making this person very suitable, very adaptive to the surrounding environment, nature is going to select it. Some simple examples, you see the difference in skin colors, okay? Why is it that the closer you move to equator, the darker the skin color of the people? The farther you move away from the equator, the closer you're going to the poles, the skin color became lighter. This happened during evolution. It took thousands of years. And why is that? This is simply a survival tactics against sun rays. So the closer you are to the equator, the warmer the climate, the hotter it is. So you need more melanin. Okay, individuals needed more, populations needed more melanin to protect themselves, protect them from the harmful UV radiation to survive. So those individuals who were darker, who had more melanin, they survived. And then those particular genes were favored by nature, so it got darker. And then as you move away from the equator, there was no sunlight, and actually people, if you have more melanin there in the skin, then whatever little sunlight you can get, you won't get, because the melanin is going to block that. So evolution favored light colored skin there, so that you could get or absorb whatever little sunlight you were getting. So this is selection, natural selection, mutation that happened over thousands of years. Example is, if you go to high altitudes, and okay, I'll come to that in the next slide. First, let me show you this one, natural selection. This is original population. And you see natural selection is making, let's say a person gets a genetic disorder, Klinefelter syndrome. Okay, Klinefelter syndrome, that means there is an abnormality, numerical abnormality with the X and the Y chromosome. So what does nature do? Now this individual has survived. The fetus did not spontaneously abort, and this individual is born. But the nature did a negative selection against the individual, and it makes the individual sterile. So this individual cannot reproduce. Okay, that was a negative selection. Now, thinking about and talking about positive selection, if you go to higher altitudes, high elevations, here if you go to Big Bear, or like in the Himalayas, people who go to ascend Mount Everest, they are usually assisted by their mountaineering guides, are usually a group of local people called Sherpas. Well, Sherpas are not originally from Nepal. They are actually from Tibet, who moved about 400 years ago. They moved to Nepal there, and they started. Now, over this course of 400 years, they live about 2,000 miles above sea level. So generations after generations, they have been living there in those high altitudes. When regular people like us who live in lowlands, when we go to high altitude, we get high altitude sickness. Okay, we get headaches, we will get shortness of breath, we feel dizzy, we will have loss of appetite, a lot of problems. The reason is air gets thinner there, less oxygen. So when you have less oxygen in high mountains, how does your body respond? Your body does not know what to do, so your body gets confused. So immediately a message goes to your kidneys, and the kidneys make a hormone called erythropoietin. And the erythropoietin is a hormone that goes and tells your blood stem cells to make a lot of red blood cells. Why? Because the body is suddenly going in a state of shock. The body is not getting oxygen, okay? Because the oxygen concentration gets lower as we move up. So the body thinks, if I can make a lot of red blood cells will contain hemoglobin, and the hemoglobin will help absorb more oxygen, from the atmosphere, and then I will get more of the oxygen transport in the body. So this is body's way of responding. But this actually doesn't work, very well, because to a certain level, yes, but as the body goes into this vicious cycle of making more and more red blood cells, your blood gets clogged with the red blood cells. There's too much red blood cells there. Your blood gets more viscous. It is not as liquid. So you have more red blood cells than your body can handle. And all those red blood cells are immediately trying to get a lot of oxygen from the air, but your body is not prepared to transport that oxygen to every cells and tissues in your body. Okay, so it really doesn't work very well, and actually it has an adverse effect. Okay, and this could cause heart problems, cardiovascular disorders. The person might get a heart attack also. But in Sherpas, it is seen they thrive at high altitudes. They don't have any problem. And genetic research has shown that the gene, EPAS1 gene, that is in charge of, in other people, it tells the EPO hormone to make more RBCs. There are SNPs, there are mutations in this gene, in the Sherpas. So because of these mutations, and because of these single nucleotide polymorphisms, this gene in Sherpas doesn't really work the way it works in us. So this gene actually does not go and tell the EPO hormone, the erythropoietin hormone, to make red blood cells. So contrary to what people believe, people think that Sherpas, or these people who are used to living in these mountaineering, high altitude areas, the mountaineering guides, they probably have a lot more red blood cells, and that's why they don't feel shortness of breath, because they can transport more oxygen. No, actually it's wrong. They don't. They don't have more red blood cells, and that is why they have been able to succeed in, instead, the mutation, it enabled these Sherpas with the exact same number of red blood cells that they have. They would have the same number of red blood cells as you and me, but their red blood cells are more efficiently transporting oxygen than us. The lung capacity is higher. Okay, so with the same number of workers, they are getting more job done, in simpler words. So it's not that the RBCs increase. The RBCs are the same, and actually it's a very positive selection that nature has on their gene. That the nature, you know, when some of the Sherpas might have caused, you know, in the initial times 400, 500 years ago, there might have been mutation, and those Sherpas were doing better. They were more adapted to these high altitude conditions. So nature favored it. It is a very classic example of positive selection. So we are done with the 5 factors of evolution. Again, we start with the pinky finger, that is small finger. So remember, small population, high effect is genetic drift or Sewall-Wright effect. Then you move to ring finger. Ring finger reminds you of marriage. So this is non-random mating, okay? Middle finger starts with an M. So M means mutation. Then index finger or pointer, pointing to which way are we moving, migration, emigrating or immigrating. And then thumb is for natural selection. So anytime there is a mutation that is beneficial, or whatever is making you better adapted to your surroundings, nature will give a thumbs up to that. That is positive selection. So all these 5 factors we have just discussed, these are the 5 factors responsible for causing evolution. And when these 5 factors do not work, then the population is in Hardy-Weinberg equilibrium. Now we were talking about natural selection. Nowadays we also do artificial selection. You know, we are always causing these genetically modified organisms, genetically modified plants, or even controlled breeding. Think of dog breeds, how, you know, dog breeders have, you know, or they're always creating new breeds, or they're trying to create, let's me take this trait of this, for example, the golden doodles, which are hybrids between the poodle and the golden retrievers. Okay, I have to make this dog hypoallergenic, but I also want the affectionate, loving nature of the golden retriever. So this is controlled breeding. Natural selection and tuberculosis. TB was a dreaded disease. When you go back a few decades ago, it would, anybody who got TB, it was like a death warrant there. They would have to go to sanatoriums, and nobody knew if this person is going to survive. And then over the course of years, natural selection acted on this disease. So natural selection operated on both the bacteria that was causing TB, okay, it's mycobacterium that acts on human beings and the human population. And then it reduced the virulence of the infection. So of course it was, medications became, you know, medical science improved, technology improved, and we got way better medications, we got antibiotics, but nature was also acting in our favor. So nature was reducing the virulence. But nowadays, new diseases of course always are coming, new, you know, infections spreading. So recent, you know, spreading of AIDS, and you must have heard a lot of times that old diseases are coming back because the bacterial strains have mutated to such an extent that now they are becoming resistant to the antibiotics that we have available presently. So what happens in HIV, that the virus that causes AIDS? And this is not just for HIV, for any virus that infects you. If you look at the graph here, this is how the infection cycle and your immunity, this shows what exactly is happening. So in HIV infection, natural selection is always acting, yes, because now we've had this disease for decades, and it controls the diversity of the different types of HIV viruses. Okay, HIV viruses are mutating very fast within the human body as the disease progresses. You see, the first stage is when the virus affects a human body, okay, maybe just 1 or 2 types of viruses, viral strains entered the body. So the diversity of the viral population is really low. This is stage 1, low viral diversity. But because they just entered the human body and the human immune system was taken by surprise, you see very severe symptoms. So symptom severity is high, okay? So this is the first stage. Then you move to the second stage of the disease, your immune system kicks in. So immune system goes, okay, it may take 1 or 2 weeks, but the immune system immediately tries to fight back. So the symptom severity goes down. You see the dotted line going down. But as your immune system is fighting, what is the immune system doing? Killing a lot of the viruses, right? Now let's say three variety of viruses had entered and the immune system became active and the immune system was able to kill 2 of those viral strains. But the one that survived, that your immune system could not kill, that particular viral strain is resistant against your immune system, against your soldiers. And now that virus increases its population. Okay, and it would go even further mutation and make even more, different types of resistant strains. You see here like this. Okay, so now viral diversity is going up, but since your immune system is also killing, so your symptoms are going down. The symptom of the disease is going down. And then in the last stage of the disease, your immune system has lost. Okay, so your immune system, because it loses, and the HIV viruses, they are notorious for taking over your immune system. Actually, they just totally make the immune system ineffective. So again, the symptoms will go up. And now those particular viral species that have survived, they know we are the ones, we are going to stay here. We don't need to change anymore. Okay, so it goes down. And then from here, it's going to continue until end. And then because the person's immune system has totally broken down, usually the person would die of something very simple, opportunistic infections, such as cold and cough, simple pneumonia. Most of the AIDS patients, they die of pneumonia because little things, the cold virus, the rhinovirus that goes inside your nose, that your body is always fighting. A person who has full-blown AIDS, the person's immune system has become so weak that they cannot even fight those viruses. And those viruses will go and they will just overtake the person's lungs and kill the person. Antibiotic resistance. This comes because of strains mutating, bacteria and viruses mutating, and natural selection acting on them. Okay, so bacteria are also very smart, and as we human beings are trying with our science and technology to develop more and more antibiotics, the bacteria are also fighting against us. They are fighting back and they are mutating. So this could be, let's say, a bacterial colony. This is a very common bacteria called the Staphylococcus aureus. This is how it looks before mutation. And this wants to infect people. Whenever it infects us, we just take antibiotics and azithromycin or something, and then we are fine. And now let's say over the course of time, one of these bacteria mutated and became red. Now because of this mutation, this red bacteria, okay, we realize that this red bacteria, the antibiotic cannot kill this bacteria. It has become resistant. And when these, all of these bacteria, when they attack our body, we take an antibiotic, we are able to kill all of these green bacteria, but this bacteria is going to survive because this has become resistant. And although we might have killed 90% of these bacteria, this bacteria alone is able to recolonize, repopulate. It's going to make more and more generations of the red bacteria, and then your body will not respond to the antibiotic. So balanced polymorphism. Why is it that in populations, we sometimes see that diseases, recessive disorders, especially, particularly recessive disorders, they are giving disease, they are causing suffering. Why doesn't nature always act against them and cause negative selection and just gets rid of those infections? Why do we keep having cystic fibrosis, okay, and other recessive disorders? Because we don't see any advantage of the cystic fibrosis mutation in individuals. We just see that the person dies. Well, actually, there are some advantages, and that's why the nature doesn't get rid of them. And this advantage is not seen in the homozygous recessive patient. It is seen in the heterozygote. And I have mentioned this before. And the advantage here in, let's say, in sickle cell anemia is that it gives protection against malaria to the heterozygote individuals. The heterozygote individuals, they have a sickle-shaped red blood cells, and their blood is thicker, so malarial parasite cannot enter and stay in these people's blood. So most of the times when you see sickle cell anemia in Africa, why does the population have so much sickle cell anemia, so much heterozygotes? Yes, definitely the homozygotes will die, but the heterozygotes are getting a survival advantage. They are not dying of malaria, because more people die of malaria than of sickle cell anemia. So nature does see an advantage there, and that is why nature is keeping it. And because it's recessive, it does not express in every generation, it does not express in every individual. You do need a double dose of that disease. Similarly, why do we keep seeing cystic fibrosis? Because yes, a homozygous recessive person will eventually die, or will have a very problematic life, but it does have an advantage in the heterozygote. And in the heterozygote, the advantage is it protects against diarrhea. It protects against GI diseases, because the mutation that occurs in cystic fibrosis, it interferes with the chloride channels. And for diarrhea to occur, you need that gene, you need those chloride channels open. And because those chloride channels are not there, so the person who has cystic fibrosis will not get GI, will not get diarrhea, will not get dysentery. So this is a summary of all the factors of evolution, all the forces that change allele frequencies. Eugenics. Eugenics means control of human reproduction with the intent of changing a population's genetic structure. That means intentionally choosing features, kind of like genetically modified human beings. Okay, the way we are modifying plants, the way genetic dog breeds are made. So similarly, eugenics is that. So positive eugenics means where promotes, if it promotes reproduction among those considered superior. Negative means it interferes with the reproduction of those judged inferior. There are both pros and cons of eugenics. It could be used anything, any science, anything can be used in a really in its worst form as well. If you only think certain traits as superior and only want those traits to occur, then you're losing diversity. And if somebody wants to kill people with the other traits, then that is the worst form in which eugenics can be used. But eugenics can also be used. Genetic engineering can be used to get rid of human suffering, get rid of a lot of diseases. We can get rid of those deleterious genes. And we're done. Any questions? If you have not put your name in the chat box, please do that before leaving. And if you have not already completed the iEval survey form for faculty and the TA, I would request that you please do that today after this lecture. Thank you, and I'll see you tomorrow.